Charles Manson is one of the most infamous cult leaders to ever exist. In 1969, Manson and his group of followers, known as the Manson family, gathered together at an abandoned ranch where they were staying at and launched a plan that would later become known as the Tate and LaBianca murders. The crime would not be carried out by Manson himself, but orchestrated by Manson. Followers Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian would execute the plan. What many don't know is that Manson had a short-lived music career. I won't go out and say that he was the next Elvis, but after hearing some of his songs myself, I think that he actually had potential. YouTube would, of course, flag me if I were to include any direct audio of these songs in this video, so I strongly suggest that you go to the description down below and check out the links to some of his songs. Manson learned to play guitar while in prison when he was serving time for various offenses. He was taught by Alvin, nicknamed Creepy Carpus, a member of a Depression-era gang. By the time that Manson emerged as a cult leader in San Francisco during the Summer of Love, he'd become a prolific songwriter. He bound his Manson family together with group sex and psychedelic drug trips, and also his songs. The family sang his lyrics as they scavenged for food in dumpsters. They harmonized with Manson around the campfire at Spawn Ranch, and they eventually sang his songs in their cells while serving life sentences. Manson nearly made it in the Los Angeles music scene, mostly through a chance association with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. On April 6, 1968, Dennis Wilson was driving through Malibu when he noticed two female hitchhikers, Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey. He picked them up and dropped them off at their destination. On April 11th, Wilson noticed that the same two girls were hitchhiking again, and this time he took them to his home at 14400 Sunset Boulevard. He recalled that the girls had told him that they had a guru, a guy named Charlie Manson, who'd recently come out of jail after 12 years. Wilson then went to a recording session. When he returned home later that night, he was met in the driveway by Manson, and when Wilson walked into his home, about a dozen people were occupying the premises, most of them being young women. By Manson's own account, he had met Wilson on at least one prior occasion at a friend's San Francisco house where Manson had gone to obtain marijuana. Manson claimed that at that time Wilson had invited him to come visit his home in Sunset Boulevard when Manson came to Los Angeles. Wilson was initially fascinated by Manson and his followers, referring to him as the Wizard in a Rave magazine article at the time. The two struck up a friendship, and over the next few months, members of the Manson family, mostly women who were treated as servants, were housed in Wilson's residence. This arrangement persisted for about 6 months. Wilson introduced Manson to a few friends in the music business, including rock band The Byrds producer Terry Melcher. Manson recorded numerous songs at Brian's home studio, although the recordings remain unheard by the public. In September of 1968, Wilson recorded a Manson song for the Beach Boys, originally titled Cease to Exist, but reworked and renamed as Never Learn Not to Love, as a single B-side released the following December. The writing was credited solely to Wilson. When asked why Manson was not credited, Wilson explained that Manson relinquished his publishing rights in favor of about $100,000 worth of stuff. It's extremely eerie when you listen to the lyrics of Never Learn Not to Love, which are almost the exact same as Cease to Exist. The passage reads, "Cease to resist, come on, say you love me. Give up your world, come on and be with me. I'm your kind, and I see. Come on, oh, I love you, pretty girl. My life is yours, and you can have my world. I'm your kind, and I see. Never had a lesson I ever learned. I know I could never learn not to love you. Come in now closer. Submission is a gift given to another. Love and understanding is for one another. I'm your kind, and I see. Never had a lesson I ever learned. I know I could never learn not to love you." Listening to the lyrics of this song, given Manson's reputation as a manipulator, makes a lot of sense. The song title, Cease to Exist, is asking the user to set aside his or her own identity in favor of someone else's. Not only that, but it disguises itself under the guise of love. Because you love someone, you submit to them. Around the time of the recording of this song, the family would destroy Wilson's Ferrari as well as his Mercedes-Benz, which had been driven to a mountainside outside of Spahn Ranch. Wilson eventually distanced himself from Manson and moved out of the house completely, leaving Manson and his followers there, and subsequently took residence at a basement apartment in Santa Monica. Virtually all of Wilson's household possessions were stolen by the Manson family. The members were evicted from his home 3 weeks before the lease was scheduled to expire. When Manson subsequently sought further contact, he left a bullet with Wilson's housekeeper to be delivered with a threatening message. Band manager Nick Grillo said that Wilson became concerned after Manson had got into a heavier drug situation, taking a tremendous amount of acid, and Dennis wouldn't tolerate it and asked him to leave. Dennis was afraid of Charlie. Writing in his 2016 memoir, Mike Love recalled Wilson saying that he had witnessed Manson shooting a black man in half with an M16 rifle and hiding his body inside of a well. Melcher had said that Wilson had been aware that the family were killing people and had been so freaked out that he just didn't want to live anymore. He was afraid, and he thought that he should have gone to the authorities, but he didn't, and the rest of it happened. When reflecting back on the situation, Mike Love told his story about when he and Wilson were visiting at Spahn Ranch.
We were invited to dinner at Dennis's house, so Bruce Johnson and I left the studio at Brian's house a couple miles away and drove over to dinner in the Pacific Palisades in this rented, log cabin type house, Willa Rogers State Park. And we got there, and Bruce and I were the only people with clothing on at dinner, so I thought that was kind of unusual. But at any rate, after dinner, they adjourned to a sort of a den, and Charlie turned on a strobe light and then passed out what was said to be acid, which I have never done that, so I declined. And however, it was kind of a lot of people, around, groping and doing whatever. It was not my kind of thing. I'm a little more shy than that. Yeah. So I left. I went to the bathroom, and I actually, it was really hot and a hot day, and I stepped in the shower. Some girl comes behind me, and then behind her comes Charlie Manson, opening the shower door and saying, "You can't do that." I said, "What's that, Charlie?" "You can't leave the group," with the Charlie Manson stare. Oh. That was pretty gnarly.
He said that to you or to her?
Me. And then I got out of there. Bruce and I just left and went back to the studio. And so I'm driving down Sunset Boulevard, and I'm thinking, oh boy, Dennis, you really got a weird one on your hands right now. Right. So what happened was Dennis couldn't confront him really because of what he'd seen at the ranch and everything. And it was he just abandoned the house.
Music producer Phil Kaufman, who had met Manson in prison, moved in briefly with Manson and his family prior to the Tate and LaBianca murders. Kaufman was a fan of Manson's music and continually urged Manson to record some of his songs. While Manson was being held on the Tate LaBianca charges, he told Kaufman, "Please put out my music." According to Kaufman, Manson phoned him 5 days a week, even though he was only allowed 3 calls per day. Manson was just very anxious for his music to be heard. After established record companies declined to become involved, Kaufman raised $3,000 and pressed 2,000 copies of the album Lie, The Love and Terror Cult, consisting of recordings made from 1967 to 1969. The album contained 13 songs. This included Cease to Exist. The album was released on March 6, 1970. It was distributed on the West Coast by the same people who did the first underground album, Great White Wonder, a collection of pirated Bob Dylan tapes. Over the next couple months, only about 300 copies were sold. Having supposedly failed to recover his investment, Kaufman signed an agreement with New York-based ESP Disc to distribute the album nationally. Also included on this album was Home Is Where You're Happy, one of Manson's better-known songs. The lyrics are as equally concerning as Cease to Exist. They go a little bit like this. Your home is where you're happy, it's not where you're not free. Your home is where you can be what you are, 'cause you were just born to be. Now they'll show you their castles and diamonds for all to see, but they'll never show you their peace of mind, 'cause they don't know how to be free. So burn all your bridges, leave your whole life behind. You can do what you want to do, 'cause you're strong in your mind. It's easy to see why so many young, impressionable people were moved by Manson and his lyrics. His messages, while read aloud are seemingly apparent, are lost when put to a catchy guitar and tune.
The reason that the girls liked me was, hey now, I'm all around you, round you. Hey now, up on your heart I can sing through you. And I play and I sing and they say, hey man, you got soul in that music. And I said, yeah, I play a little bit, you know. I like music. And they said, man, you're really somebody. I said, oh, I am? Oh, I just got out of jail. I don't know what somebody is. They like my music. They say, man, we want to get you over. I said, get me over for what? They said, we take you down here to Beverly Hills and we want to get you in because you're a star. I said, I'm a what? They said, you're a star. So they took me to the Beach Boys. And I went and I got on the surfboard and I rode around and I looked and I said, gee, huela chingazos, this is more trouble than what I just got out of. You got look at yourself. You got to wear that, whether you like it or not. You got to do things. You got to get up and go through all kinds of changes, whether you want to or not, doesn't matter. Your whole life is put in your paycheck. You couldn't pay me all the money in the world to do something I don't want to do.
Also from Lie, the Love and Terror, Look at Your Game Girl was famously covered by famed Los Angeles rock band Guns N' Roses. The song, about an insane woman, was a favorite of Guns N' Roses singer Axl Rose. In the 1980s, Manson made many recordings via tape recorders in prison. These were given to associates on the outside. It is not known exactly how many were made. However, over a dozen unique tapes have surfaced over the years. These recordings were the source of several CDs, such as Commemoration, Live at San Quentin, and The Way of the Wolf. A short piece of spoken words by Manson also appears on a Greek private CD release by Anger Department. The acoustic album Completion was recorded in the 1980s by Henry Rollins of Black Flag fame. The record was supposed to be released by SST Records, but the project was later canceled due to the label receiving death threats. Only 5 test pressings of Completion were ever made, 2 of which remain in Rollins' possession. Scheduled for release by Lupo Records on May 7, 2007, was the Charles Manson album titled The Summer of Hate, the 67 Sessions. It was the first release of the complete recordings that were made in the rehearsal studio on September 11, 1967, that went on to be used as demos in an effort to secure a recording deal. A Manson music history video would not be complete without mentioning his fascination with the Beatles.
What did you think of Manson when that thing happened?
I don't know what I thought when it happened. I just think a lot of the things he says are true. That he's a child of the state, made by us. And he took their children in when nobody else would, is what he did. But of course he's cracked, all right.
What was your feelings when he said, well, he was helter-skelter?
Well, he's balmy. He's like any other Beatle kind of fan who reads mysticism into it. I mean, we used to have a laugh putting this, that, and the other in a light-hearted way that some intellectual would read as some symbolic youth generation what's it. But we also took seriously some parts of the role, you know. But, I mean, I don't know, what's Helter Skelter got to do with knifing somebody? You know, I'd never listened to the words properly of Helter Skelter. It was just a sort of a noise, you know.
According to former Manson family members, when the Beatles' White Album came out, Manson listened to it over and over and over again. He was quite certain that the Beatles had tapped into his spirit, the truth, that everything was going to come down and the black man was going to rise. It wasn't that Manson listened to the White Album and started following what he thought the Beatles were saying. It was the other way around. He thought that the Beatles were talking about what Manson had been expounding upon for years. Every single song on the White Album, Manson felt that they were singing about him. According to Manson family member Paul Watkins, Manson first used the term Helter Skelter at a gathering of the family on New Year's Eve 1968 at Myers Ranch near California's Death Valley. The apocalyptic scenario had Manson as the war's ultimate beneficiary and its musical cause. With the family, Manson would create an album whose songs would bear messages as subtle as what he heard in the songs of the Beatles. These would cause listeners to want to join the family. In the Vision's logic, black men would be deprived of white women, whom the political changes of the 1960s had made sexually available to them. They would eventually lash out in violent crimes against the whites. Manson, according to family members Brooks Poston, said that a group of real blacks would come out of the ghettos and do atrocious crimes in the richer sections of Los Angeles and other cities. They would do an atrocious murder with stabbing, killing, cutting bodies to pieces, smearing blood on the walls, writing pigs on the walls in victims' own blood. When frightened whites, according to Watkins and Tex Watson, would retaliate with a murderous rampage, militant blacks would exploit it to provoke a war of near extermination between racist and non-racist whites over the treatment of blacks. In the wake of that, black militants would then arise to finish off the few white survivors and to kill off all non-blacks. In this Holocaust, as Watkins went on to explain, the members of the Manson family would have little to fear. They would wait out the war in a secret city underneath Death Valley, a city they'd reach through a hole in the ground. Upon the war's conclusion, they would be the only remaining whites. Emerging then from the underground, they would rule over the blacks, who, having completed the white man's karma, would no longer want to kill. Proving, as Watkins explained, incapable of running the world, blacks would then go running to Manson. The term for this racial war, Helter Skelter, was taken from the Beatles song of the same name, which Manson purportedly interpreted as concerned with the war. The song was on the band's White Album. According to Paul Watkins, Manson and his followers began preparing for Helter Skelter in the months before they committed the murders. They worked on songs for the hoped-for album, which they anticipated would set off everything. They prepared vehicles and other items for escape for their Los Angeles base to Death Valley when the days of violence would arrive. They went over maps to plot a route that would bypass highways and get them to the desert safely. Manson, according to Tex Watson, used parts of the song Helter Skelter to plot out the escape route to the desert. This apocalypse obviously never came to fruition. Manson would die in prison in 2017, leaving the world with perhaps more questions than answers. Despite his legacy and the terror that he rained down on his victims, rumors of a neo-Manson cult have arisen since his demise. The assertion states that a neo-Manson cult exists in Europe, represented by approximately 70 rock bands still playing songs by Manson and songs in support of him.